Appledog snarled, teeth bared, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His tail whipped back and forth, a furry metronome keeping time with his rage. Black Cat hissed, back-arched, claws extended, a tiny panther ready to pounce. Their eyes met. A silent challenge crackling in the air. The source of their contention, a simple red ball, lay between them, forgotten and unimportant in the heat of their territorial dispute. Appledog lunged, a blur of white and brown, jaws snapping at the air. Black Cat danced aside, a shadow disappearing into the sun-dappled grass. The battle was joined, a whirlwind of fur and claws, punctuated by snarls and hisses, neither willing to yield, each determined to claim victory. The red ball lay abandoned, a silent witness to their primal struggle. A shadow fell upon the battling animals. A hand, large and pudgy, reached down, attempting to separate the furious combatants. Now, boys," a jolly voice boomed. "Let's be having none of that." The chubby ginger man, his face a mixture of amusement and concern, struggled to impose order. His cheeks, rosy and round, wobbled as he waded into the fray, his floral-patterned shirt straining against his considerable girth. Appledog, distracted, turned his attention to the newcomer, barking and snapping at the intrusive hand. Black Cat, ever opportunistic, took advantage of the distraction. With a hiss and a flurry of claws, she snatched the red ball and darted away, disappearing into a thicket of bushes. The ginger man, relieved the fight had ended, sighed and straightened his shirt. Appledog, realizing his prize had been pilfered, whimpered in frustration. He looked up at the ginger man, his expression a mixture of confusion and betrayal. The ginger man, oblivious to the canine drama unfolding before him, surveyed the scene with a sigh. "Well, that was exciting," he muttered to himself, rubbing his belly. He glanced around, a sudden pang of hunger gnawing at him. His gaze fell upon the sandy ground, and with a shrug, he scooped up a handful and popped it into his mouth. The sand crunched unpleasantly between his teeth, doing little to sate his hunger. "Ugh," he sputtered, spitting out the gritty mess. Note to self, sand is not a viable snack. The ginger man dusted the sand off his hands, his stomach grumbling in protest. The brief distraction of the dog and cat fight had only served to amplify his hunger. He needed sustenance, and he needed it now. His eyes scanned the surrounding area, searching for any sign of civilization. A park bench, a water fountain, a lone oak tree swaying gently in the breeze. Nothing. Despair began to set in. Suddenly, a beacon of hope. In the distance, a neon sign flickered to life, casting a warm, inviting glow. "Joe's Diner," the sign proclaimed. A slow grin spread across the ginger man's face. "Dinner time," he chuckled, and with a spring in his step, he set off towards the diner. The bell above the door jingled merrily as the ginger man entered Joe's Diner. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon washed over him, a symphony of deliciousness that made his stomach rumble with anticipation. He settled heavily into a red vinyl booth, the worn leather creaking in protest. A perky waitress, her name tag proclaiming her to be Betty, sashayed over, a notepad in hand. "Well, hello there, handsome," she chirped. "What can I get for you?" The ginger man smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Just bring me the menu, sweetheart," he replied, his voice a low rumble, "and make it snappy. A man's got to eat." The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The ginger man drummed his fingers impatiently on the table, his stomach growling louder with each passing moment. Where was that menu? He was famished, and his patience was wearing thin. Just as he was about to get up and demand service, Betty reappeared, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm so sorry, hon," she said, "but it seems we're all out of menus. Can I tell you what we have?" The ginger man stared at her, his eyes narrowed. "You know what?" he growled. "Forget the menu. I'll have, He pointed a thick finger directly at a woman sitting at the counter, her back to him. Betty's eyes widened in horror. "So you can't be serious!" she exclaimed, her voice a mix of disbelief and fear. The ginger man, however, was undeterred. He stood up, his shadow falling over the unsuspecting woman at the counter. Before Betty could react, the ginger man scooped up the woman, her screams muffled by his hand. He took a bite, a look of grim satisfaction spreading across his face. Tangy," he mumbled, chewing thoughtfully. Betty stood frozen, paralyzed with terror. The ginger man, noticing her, grinned, his teeth stained crimson. "Now about that menu, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dripping with menace. But before Betty could even whimper, the ginger man decided he wasn't quite finished with his appetizer. The ginger man finished the woman in a few more bites, tossing her aside like a discarded candy wrapper. He licked his lips, savoring the taste, before turning his attention to the rest of the diner. His eyes, once filled with hunger, now gleamed with something more sinister, something insatiable. He lunged for the counter, swallowing terrified patrons whole. He crunched on tables, chairs, and napkin dispensers with equal gusto. The diner, once a haven of comfort food and greasy spoons, was now a playground for his monstrous appetite. Bursting forth from the diner's shattered remains, he continued his rampage, consuming everything in his path. Buildings crumbled, cars became crunchy snacks, and terrified screams were swallowed whole. The Ginger Man, no longer a man but a force of nature, a cosmic horror made flesh, stood triumphant over a devastated world. He had eaten it all: cities, mountains, oceans, even the very air itself. His belly, a vast, unending void, still grumbled with hunger. He looked up, his gaze piercing the veil of reality, and saw more to consume, more to devour. With a terrifying grin, he opened his maw wide, wider than any mouth should rightfully open, and took a bite out of the very fabric of existence. The camera lens cracked, the image distorting before being consumed by a void of teeth and hunger. The screen went black, the only sound a faint, satisfied burp echoing through the void. The Ginger Man was full, for now.